Hi friends, Shawna Clingerman here, and I just wanted to share with you a quick little simplified tutorial when it comes to one of my current absolute favorite creative practices. They are these kind of washy, abstract watercolor backgrounds, and I'm going to tell you right now, I didn't really learn this because somebody taught me. I more just started playing around and came upon this technique that combines all sorts of watercolor techniques that I've learned throughout the past several years in a really kind of free-flowing, abstract, maybe oceany, watery type of a way. This is not my favorite one, but in general, I am just obsessed with this technique where the colors all seem to kind of flow one into the next, and there are these little kind of abstract wavy shapes filling up the page. I cannot stop. As you can see, I've been painting them like mad, and honestly, creating these is not that complicated. It is more a matter of trusting your intuition, going with the flow, like the watery flow, and then letting the results kind of be whatever they will. And so instead of giving you, this really specific kind of measured out tutorial, I thought what I would do is I would just work through one of these pages with you, talk to you about the things I do, and then if you are interested in trying this really fun, free-flowing, mindless technique, go ahead and do it and see what happens for you, because depending on the shapes that you work with, the colors that you choose, and the order that you choose to put them in, you're going to find that your results will always be all your own, because these pages kind of have a mind of their very own. So, what do you think? Should we get started? Okay, so the technique for this process is very simple, and the supply list is short, which means you could probably do it on your lap on the couch, which is where I often do it. But all you need is watercolor paper. I love having a spiral bound notebook. This pad by Canson, it is the 140 pound. We'll link all the stuff below for you, but it's just a simple, inexpensive watercolor pad. This paper is cold pressed, so that means that it has some bump and texture to it. It is thick, not the thickest, but thick enough to handle a lot of water, which is what you're going to need for this technique. You're also going to want watercolors. Obviously, these are my favorite watercolors, so these are the ones I've been using more often than not, although I will tell you I've used really inexpensive watercolor palettes and been able to achieve the same results. So use what you have. These are pans, and the set is called Kuritake Ganzi Tambai, and I always say that weird, but I have the 36 color set. There are a lot of different sizes of sets. These pans, what I like about them is they are just incredibly vibrant, while still being translucent and flowy. They kind of have that perfect in between for me, so that they pop on the page, the colors show up pretty vibrant, but at the same time they work with water and go totally transparent too. So this is the set I'm going to be using, and I like to use a handful of colors that I'm comfortable with. Usually I pick either like all shades of the ocean. If you choose a more monochromatic scheme, you don't have to worry so much about whether colors are going to turn into mud with each other. If you use colors that are very different from each other, you're just going to want to be thinking about not putting things that live across each other on the color wheel, or, the rainbow. Like, you don't want to put colors that are too distant in relationship on the rainbow next to each other, because they will turn into mud. They will fight and become mud. I'm going to do a little bit of teal, a little bit of light blue, some purple, and some pinky colors. This is kind of my go-to palette that I really love playing with, and so I thought, why not just choose those? And I'm having trouble getting this one out with my nails. That one will do. I'm going to want a blue as well, something kind of dark, and the truth is I'm not exactly sure what these colors are until I play with them, But I don't know, for me, that's actually kind of the fun. So I'm just letting it be what it's gonna be. Let's grab another pink up here that's really kind of more in the reddish family. So you'll get your colors, you'll get your paper, you will want some water. You can also do this with a water brush, but I find it to be easiest with just a paintbrush because you can wipe it clean. And then you are gonna want some watercolor paintbrushes. This is the style that I would recommend. I have a few in this size range and this style. Depending on your collection, you don't need to buy anything special, but you are going to want a round tip. I tend to like a round tip, I should say. And you're going to want it to be on the bigger side, depending on how big your paper is. These are 8 and 10. You could even work with something as big as a 14 if you wanted to, but I would probably stick with the 10. 10 is my favorite for this project. So that's what I'm going to do. That's it. All you need are those things. You do want to keep a second watercolor brush on hand that is dry. It is called a thirsty brush, and I'll show you how we use it if we need to use it. So when we go into this project, please do not have a lot of preconceived ideas because Flowy watercolor is very flowy, which means it's going to kind of do what it wants to do. And so I'm just opening up my notebook and I'm just going to think of a starting shape. I like to do that kind of abstract wavy feel, which you've seen in a lot of mine. I like to not have all the waves have the exact same shape. And so my favorite ones usually are ones that have a really strong kind of curve setting it off. And so from there, we're just going to get started. You want to look at your color palette and figure out kind of the rainbow order of your palette so that it will cooperate with whatever, with its, you know, its little buddies on either side, because we don't want to end up with mud. So I'm kind of putting these in rainbow-ish order, meaning red to purple to blue, blue to green to aqua-y green is kind of what I'm thinking. Maybe I'll change it like that. And I don't know if those are even going to make the cut. We will see. So once you're done, you're going to start painting. But before you start painting with dry palettes, with dry pans of watercolor, I really do recommend getting them a little wet. You can do this with a spray bottle, or since I'm usually not sitting in my studio and I don't usually have a spray bottle on hand, I just do it with water and I just kind of shake some drips of water into my colors. That will make them nice and flowy because we want very flowy, wet, saturated paint for this project. So I'm going to get these nice and wet, and as they sit, they're going to soften up my paints. The other thing that you're going to want to do is you're going to want to look at your paper, kind of get a feel for what it's asking of you, decide your orientation. Do you want it to be landscape or horizontal, or landscape or vertical? I'm going to stick with vertical because that's what I've been doing a lot of. And then you just want to get started. You get a nice wet brush and you pick whatever color you kind of would like to appear sort of in the middle. This is a little confusing because I think I really actually want my purple in the middle, or maybe this light blue. Let's start with the light blue. So I'm going to show you here. My paint is getting wet. It's not as wet as I want it, so I'm just stirring it around a little bit. I want the pigment that I pick up to be like milky, like skim milk, very, very watery and loose. So I'm getting a very watery brush with a very watery paint, and I'm going directly on my dry page, and I'm just going to do a swoop of some kind, some sort of a wavy feel. Whatever comes out will be fine. So I'm just going to go ahead and get started with one line. Now notice as I went down on the page, it is all wet. You can see that sheen. That means this is wet and ready to be played with. So now that it's all wet and I've got my color down, I'm going to just not grab more pigment, but only grab more water. Lots of it. So my paintbrush is almost dripping, and I'm just going to go ahead and add water along the edge of the lines of my color. What happens when you add wet to the edge of a wet watercolor stroke is it just starts blending. And this is kind of where that soothing watercolor interaction starts happening. As I move, I just move quick. I keep a lot of water on my page. I can add more pigment, but first I want to get it nice and wet. Depending on if I want this to be a strong line or not, I could add water along the side. But for kicks, let's leave that solid and then let this kind of fade down into this lighter, really light kind of fadey hue. So if you look up close, you can see the blue is just slowly fading its way down my page, down that watery line. Now we can just keep adding, kind of working through our color scheme and use our colors to kind of keep adding interest to this wavy page. We can move our page around if we want to get that water moving more, or if you feel like you have too much water, you can always pick some up. I'm not feeling that yet, so I'll show you that in the future, I'm sure. So now I'm just going to do the same thing where I'm bringing some clean, not painty water below this blue so we can start pulling that color down my page a little bit. And notice how that really pigmented blue just kind of takes on a whole life of its own as I start adding water. I like to move really quick when I'm doing this because I want my colors to stay like pliable with water, and I kind of want like the magic to happen on its own without me forcing those colors to do those things. And so while it's still wet, I'm just moving quickly and I'm adding my next color family. But also with like just the expectation that the unexpected might happen, and that is kind of the point. And then I'm going to grab my darker green and I'm just going to start at the very bottom of my page. I'm going to draw a little line like this, and then I'm going to kind of sweep it up a little bit and let it kind of take its own little place at the bottom of the page. Now, there's not enough water here to grab my dark green to my light green, so I'm just going to go ahead and add water. Clean water always gives your paint somewhere to travel, and so I use that quite a bit in this process to kind of add those wavy feels. So I'm going to let that stop right there. And I have some thoughts about this bottom part, but we can come back to that after we do the top part. So remember, this is all wet, so now we have to figure out whether we want that to be a harsh line or a soft line. Just for kicks and contrast, let's leave it as a soft line, and this time let's come up above it with some of this purple and leave, oops, that part was wet and my hand touched it, so I'm actually going to go ahead and rinse my brush really quick and just add a little bit of water here so it flows a little bit more. Sometimes those accidents are actually my favorite parts of a painting, so I'm not too terribly worried about it, but I do want to make sure that it's not like an obvious palm print. So see how I'm just kind of tapping my page? Let's just let this kind of travel around a little bit and do its own thing. And let's go ahead and fade these together more while we're at it, because apparently that's what wanted to happen. That's kind of how I treat this project, like what wants to happen. Not what do I want to do, but what wants to happen. So since we know that that is wet down there, let's go ahead and do ourselves a favor and work from the top down by flipping it around. Now I have this purpley color, and I'm going to do the same thing, only this time, let's do this. Let's start a new wave that kind of goes like this, with this kind of purpley color. The pigmenting on this, you can tell it's like a little watery, but that's okay, because we'll bring more of this in. So we're going to go ahead and do this, and then we're going to bring it all the way down to where that blue is. And notice that blue is dry, so the purple and blue are not fading together like the other line. Instead, they're just kind of creating a stroke mark. That is a totally legitimate way to have your lines meet. You just have to decide what you want. So for this one, I'm going to have a few hard lines and a few soft fadey lines, and this will be my first hard line. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use those quick strokes to kind of create a little bit extra of this. See where they meet? Like that transparency brings in this pretty purple color. I just decided I really liked it. So now I'm coming and I'm adding a little bit there. And then let me show you a trick. See how that has two hard lines because the purple and then the purple to blue? I'm going to go ahead and add some water below it. So it's not touching the edge of the purple yet. It's kind of just like a long wet area, and then that purple, when it touches the water, is going to start fading a little bit more. So now see how it changed from a hard line to a soft line because I added some water for it to fade into. Even though the blue was dry, it was still a little bit pliable because watercolor always is, and the water kind of gave it a place to kind of dissipate and lessen, so we ended up with a bit more of a line there. So I'm feeling like this swoop is too extreme and it's following it too much. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring some water up here and try to make this swoop not quite so mimicky of the swoop below it by just adding some water and letting this purple travel a little bit. Once again, that clean water just gives that purple a place to travel. Now my paint is a little bit purple on my brush, but that's because it's picking up some of the purple around it. I'm going to go even a little bit higher because I'm feeling like that line is just too similar to the line below. But I really like this one, how it has like a really fadey feel. It's not super intense in a lot of the places, but look at the way as this green dried below, it got like some extra texture. And then up here we have this. This is what I'm talking about. I really, really love the way these pages just kind of take on a life of their own. So now we're going to do the same thing. I'm picking up this pink, and I'm going to go ahead and draw this pink right alongside this line, and I'm going to let it kind of burst into the wet. It's still wet down here, dry up there. And when my red kind of runs against it, let's flip around again to save ourselves that wet hand in the paint thing. And I'm just going to go ahead and touch the edge of this so that it just does what it pleases as it meets the water. I just love this effect in watercolor when the pigment just kind of burst down below, kind of without your permission even. It's my favorite. So I'm gonna go ahead and do this, and then I'm gonna do that. So notice how this swoop is kind of getting smaller right there, and then bigger right here. That kind of contrasts what was happening elsewhere, and I'll actually go a little bit lower. And then I'm gonna use water mostly to pull this pigment in together to the middle, instead of more paint, because we don't want solid, we wanna add that variation of the color just fading around. So by just adding that wet water, suddenly my paint is kind of able to do whatever it wants to there. So now we've got this really dark pink up here. It's darker even than I would want. So let's use our thirsty brush. If you have too much color or too much water, you can grab a dry brush and just kind of scrub away at something and take a little bit of the color. So I don't want this whole section to feel quite so solid. So I'm using my dry brush and I'm just sucking up some of this pigment and color so that it kind of fades in the middle a little bit more. If your paintbrush gets too messy, you're gonna need another one, because once it's, painted that color, it's not going to pick it up anymore. It's going to spread it about. So I'm grabbing another dry brush to kind of do the same thing. And then we will bring some water in again, and we will let it kind of fade around. But first, let's just get this a little bit lighter. I like that a lot better. I am leaving that dark line there because I do like that. And now I'm cleaning my brush off completely, and I'm just going to dab a little bit of water in here so that this paint can kind of travel a little bit and do its own thing, because I kind of over manhandled it there. And I want to keep that free-flowing feel. That's kind of the point here. You could even add some splatters if things are getting too under control. But I don't know if you necessarily want to do that. I'm going to pick up these splatters because I don't think I do. There we go. So look at this. Oh, I love it. Okay. Right here, my splatter caused a weird dot. I have to decide if that's part of what I want or if it's kind of messing with my feel. If it's messing with my feel, it's an easy solution. Wet water, kind of let it flow, and then let it kind of take on a life of its own again, which is kind of the whole point. Okay, now why not? Let's use this really dark red at the top. A part of me feels like this color is going to just be way too orangey, so I'm actually going to skip one back. This color I know is not quite so orangey, so let's use this one instead. And I'm just going to put pure pigment. I'm getting it wet, but not as wet, because I want this to be a really dark red line that kind of shows up at the top here. So I got that. I'm going to push my paint around, and I'm going to flip it, and we're going to do that one more time right here, just like I did on the bottom. I'm going to keep that nice and thick, and then we're going to use our water to bring those together and end up with a final flowy result. So just straight up water, kind of connecting to that line so it can kind of flow down a little bit. And look at what's happening here. This is exactly what I wanted. Notice the way that this is just kind of like fading down. I am not even going to tilt it. I'm not even going to tweak it. I want that pigmented part to just dry exactly like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave it be in the fresh air and let it take on a little life of its own. I'm adding a little bit more water here so that we can kind of have that color kind of fading in. And maybe I'll even pick up a little bit of that water now too, because I went a little overboard. But friends, there we have it. This is it. That is the technique that I use. And you can see, you can take advantage of those harsh lines. You can blend those lines more by adding more water. You can tilt your paper here and there, and you can kind of just let the watercolor take on a life of its own. And when you're done, you're going to end up with something that probably looks nothing like this, because in the end, this practice really is about letting loose and kind of letting the paint set the tone. Hopefully that's helpful for you. If this practice is relaxing for you, I would love to hear about it. Or if you have another practice that you enjoy, especially to kind of wind yourself down and paint in a way that's freeing and relaxing without a lot of, to-dos or technicalities, I would love to hear about those below, because I just so believe in setting ourselves up with practices that make creativity just fun and easy, because sometimes we just need to let loose, and we can do that with watercolor 100% as long as we set our mind in the right direction and we kind of let it be easy and fun. Thanks so much, friends. If you like this video, be sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button so that you know next time that I have a video for you. I will be sharing more videos like this and all sorts of other things in the future. Thanks, friends. Happy painting!